is going to be Paleo Cuneiform, the Ancients to Now. I'm Dr. James P. Wickstrom, a Doctorate of Letters. P.O. Box 102, Rhodes, R-H-O-D-E-S, Michigan, 48652, U.S. of A. It is Saturday, October 24th, 2009, Catholic calendar time. Not Yahweh's time. All right? Now, as we get into our topic and what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about a lot of history coming from the cuneiform, and we'll be getting into that. And it'll also include the transplant species on the earth. Now I want you to remember this, that term, the transplant species. We're going to talk about Adam male. You'll notice it's a small a, Adam male. We're going to talk about Oanes, an individual that is talked about in two different specific periods of time that cover an area of over 400,000 years. He was later also called Dagon. But then again, there's also a people that reside on the African continent who are called the Dagon people. So we are also going to talk about Sataniel, who in religion you refer to as Satan, in a more simplification form of pronunciation. And we're going to talk about people that Enoch, the great patriarch that was taken away in a chariot of fire by Yahweh, the Grigori. We're going to talk about the Nomos people. And we're going to talk about the Dropa people. And then, toward the end therein, we're going to talk about, up just a little please, we're going to talk about Adam man, with a capital A. Not Adam male, Adam man, which is derived from the word human, which is spirit man. You'll notice the first Adam was a small a, and he was classified, as I put him up here, as a male gender, not a man. So there's going to be a lot of different topics discussed here. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very challenging, all right? And it's just time that it's related to, and we can continue to discourse. It states in the book of Genesis, and by the way, Genesis is not, the word is not presented in the Strong's Concordance. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. But Genesis means the beginning of life. We're going to relate to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. This is Yahweh speaking through the ancient Aramaic that was brought forth in what you call your parchments. For those of you who still cling or want to look at it as a religious thing, in the scriptures, the Father Yahweh said, let us. Now, let us is plural. It is not singular. It is two or more. He also then stated, let us replenish the earth. Replenish the earth. Now, in order to replenish anything, it had to be plenished prior. If you have milk in a glass and you drink it and you're still thirsty, you're going to replenish the milk in the glass to have some more. But in its origin, it was at one time plenished when you poured it in the glass. The earth was no different in history. It was plenished. But the Father said in Genesis 1, as we go to 26 to 28, replenish the earth. I want you to remember this now and keep this behind your right ear as we continue into our dialogue today. Now, I want you to recall as we go into the book of Genesis, and as we go into the first chapter, it states that very, very simple and very to the point. It stated that in chapter 1, verse 1, that in the beginning, Yahweh created the heaven and earth. And then verse 2 really gives impact. It said, and the earth was without form, it was void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Yahweh moved upon the face of the waters. The Spirit of Yahweh moved upon the face of the waters. For remember, he says, I give life and I take life. Is this correct? And then the Father said in verse 3, let there be light. And there was light. And Yahweh saw the light, that it was good, and Yahweh divided the light from the darkness. He called the light day, the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first. And then he said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters and the waters. And there was a firmament, etc., etc. All right? And then he brought forth, as he's bringing forth the sun and the moon now, let there be light, all right? We always got to remember to go up to verse 2, that the earth was without form and it was void. Now you know that life must have oxygen and sunshine to survive. This is just an essence of physics within itself, of life. If the sun were to go out and we had no oxygen to breathe, life as we know it would die upon the surface of the earth. Even the trees need the sunshine. The grass and the flowers and the people, and even the little critters, the crickets, everything needs the sun. All right? Now, and yet, as we continue on and we go into the vegetation, and the dry earth came up, and then there was vegetation, and then the animals were brought, etc., etc. The question that you must ask yourself is this, and using common sense and logic, if the earth was what? Was void and without form, where did all life come from? Or do we just sit and take it for granted? Or is there an answer? Well, the first place we have to look for the answer is Yahweh. Because he comes before all things, including life. Because he was before. And he made the visible from the invisible. Now, we are going to be getting into this topic too, of what happened to the earth, and we are going to really delve into the replenish. The replenish. And we're not taking anything for granted. We're not going to go with any humbug here. All right? We're going to lock on and stay locked on as to what is going to be presented today. Now, George Smith was an Assyriologist. That means Assyrian here. An Assyriologist, George Smith, he was from England. He was British, all right? And he was an Israelite by race. Not a Jew, but he was an Israelite, a white Western European person. A very gifted man. Very impressed, and I dedicate this lecture to him. For his name has been blotted out of homes, never remembered, and someplace over in England there's a grave with a gravestone that says George Smith. But we're going to put this lecture to him and to his memory, for it was from his work that ignited this lecture that you are now going to be taking place in, all right? Now, George Smith was an Assyriologist. In Chelsea, London, he was born on March 26, 1840. He passed away in August 19, 1876. He was only 36 years old when he passed away. He was a pioneering England Assyriologist who first discovered and translated the Epic of Gilgamesh. You've heard me relate about that, haven't you? The oldest known written work of literature. To him is given all this credit of the Epic of Gilgamesh. But not only that, for the Epic of Gilgamesh says that at one time an individual came to this earth who was known as half God and half man. It is a story. It is the oldest story that has ever been deciphered. And it was deciphered by this gentleman and discovered by George Smith. Now, next please. And he wrote a book. Now remember, he only lived to be 36 years of age. That's a short lifespan. Containing the description of the creation, the fall of man, the deluge, the Tower of Babel, the times of the patriarchs, and Nimrod. Babylonian fables, legends of the gods, from the cuneiform inscription. Up, please. By George Smith, of the Department of Oriental Antiquities, British Museum, author of the History of Babel, Assyrian Discoveries, etc., with allusions. Up more, please. This comes from a book as reprint from 1876. That's very interesting because Yahweh said to return back to the old ways. Are we not to also look back to the old ways about what really happened and has, since we even talk about Genesis chapter 1? Of course. Next please. Now here we have again George Smith. I blew his picture up a little more. Kind of looks like a fine fellow. Got friendly eyes, all right. Then again, he only lived 36 years. And bibliography, Smith was a naturally talented, but since he'd been born the son of a working class family in Victorian England, his ability to acquire a formal education was limited. At age 14, Smith was apprenticed to a printing firm to learn banknote engraving, 14 years of age, in which he excelled. But in his spare time, however, he became fascinated with the Assyrian culture and history, reading everything that was available. His interest was so keen that while working at the print shop to support his wife and children, he spent his lunch hours at the British Museum, studying the cuneiform tablets that were first unearthed near Mosul by Austin Henry Layard and his Iraqi assistant Hormuz Rossman during the archaeological expedition during 1840, and then brought back to the Middle East to the British Museum, where they were made available to the public on a limited scale. 14 years old, he's already apprenticed into learning engraving. And in his spare time, if that wasn't enough, he was spending his lunch hour at the British Museum of History learning Assyrian cuneiform. Today, you can't get the kids away from their Nintendo games and television. Now, Smith soon became more about cuneiform than the museum staff. And he was brought to the attention of a major Assyrian scholar of the day, Henry Rawlinson. Smith then made his first important discovery: the date of the payment of the tribute by Jehu, king of Israel, to Shalmaneser III. Sir Henry suggested to the trustees of the museum that Smith should join him in the preparation of the third and fourth volumes of the cuneiform inscriptions of Western Asia. In 1867, Smith was appointed assistant to the Assyriology department. The earliest of Smith's successes was the discovery of two inscriptions. One fixing the date of the total eclipse of the sun in the month of Sivan in May 763 BC, and the other the date of the invasion of Babylonia by the Elamites in 2280 BC. There's a very bright young man But of course, because of the aristocracy in England, if you weren't born of a wealthy family, you were looked down and frowned upon. And it's also been getting that way in the United States in the last 60 years also. Only, i.e., the children of the rich can go to the universities. The poor have to work at McDonald's and go to Wendy's. And it's getting worse by the day. Now, in 1871, Smith published Annals of Ashur-banipal, translated and communicated to the newly founded Society of Biblical Archaeology a paper on the early history of Babylonia and an account, his decipherment of the cryptotin inscriptions. In 1872, Smith achieved worldwide fame by his translation of the Chaldean account of the Great Flood, which he read before the Society of Biblical Archaeology on December 3rd, and whose audience included the Prime Minister, William Ewart Gladstone, the only known instance of a serving British Premier ever attending a lecture on Babylonian literature. A very gifted fellow was Mr. Smith, very intelligent, but again, passing away at a very young age of 36. Now, this work is better known today as the final chapter of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature in the world, for which Smith is now popularly and justly famed as the discoverer. And this is why I am dedicating this lecture to this gentleman whose name has been forgotten through the annals of time and the cobwebs and everything that is involved in it, of his tremendous achievement. And also, not only that, for igniting my thought to bring forth the other information that's going to be presented in this lecture. The following January, Edwin Arnold, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, arranged for Smith to go to Nineveh at the expense of that newspaper, and carried out excavations with a view to finding the missing fragments of the flood story. This journey resulted not only in the discovery of some missing tablets, but also of fragments that recorded the succession and duration of the Babylonian dynasties. Now, for those who are history buffs, this lecture and presentation should be very exciting. History is not boring. Truth should be very enlightening, and people should be very happy to learn truth and to learn. The reason that children go to school today and they're not happy to go is because of the fables and the watered down text that they have to learn. Now, so in November of 1873, Smith again left England for Nineveh for a second expedition, this time at the expense of the museum. And he continued his excavations at the Tell of Cuneiform, or Nineveh. An account of his work is given in the Assyrian Discoveries, published early in 1875. The rest of the year was spent in fixing together and translating the fragments relating to creation, the results of which were published in the Chaldean account of Genesis in 1880, co-written with Archibald Sayce. In March of 1876, the trustees of the British Museum sent Smith once more to excavate the rest of Ashur-banipal's library. At Ischai, a small village about 60 miles northeast of Aleppo, he fell ill with dysentery. He died in Aleppo on August 19th. He left a wife and several children, to whom a small annuity of £150 was granted by the Queen of England. Now, since all of us that are here, and as we are participating in this lecture presentation, and for those of you listening, wherever you are, on public service TV or in your living room or wherever, since we don't have a private jet aircraft and an unlimited amount of money so that all of us could get on the jet aircraft at one time and go on a wonderful trip and visit the British Museum of History, all right? it's very interesting that as we look here, I brought the British Museum of History to you, a portion of it. And up here on the upper left is the Epic of Gilgamesh that Mr. Smith not only discovered, but he translated for the people to have a place. So this is the description of the British Museum of History, room 55, the cuneiform collection. The display also contains the most famous cuneiform tablet of them all, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So if you were to go to the British Museum of History, you will come and you will see exactly what you're looking at here, and right up here is the Epic of Gilgamesh by Mr. Smith. The oldest written of history of the creation. Now, and here's another picture of it. I have brought it up. This is in cuneiform. As they wrote, this is the tablet of Gilgamesh that he discovered, all right, of which I blew up for you to have another look. The Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Samaria is perhaps the oldest known story in the world. It tells the story of the legendary hero king from the Sumerian city-state of Uruk, 2750 to 2500 BCE. Later, Mesopotamian civilizations adopted this myth as their own. At first it was part of an oral tradition, but was finally written down on clay tablets like this one in cuneiform writing. It was originally written on 12 clay tablets in cuneiform script from the royal tombs of Ur. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Ur, the Chaldees, of course, was the priest city. All right? Now, we're just going to have to work a little here and slide that back and forth. My next discovery, as Mr. Smith said, my next discovery here was a fragment evidently belonging to the creation of the world. Now we're going to get somewhere. This was the upper corner of a tablet and gave the fragmentary account of the creation of animals. Further on in this trench, I discovered two other portions of this legend, one giving the creation and the fall of man, the other having part of the war between the gods and the evil spirits. At that time I did not recognize the importance of these fragments, excepting the one with the account of the creation of animals, and as I had immediately afterward to return to England, I made no further discoveries in this direction. With all the wonderful work that Mr. Smith did, he still, in that time of his short lifespan of 36 years, did not come to the understanding that the white Western European people were the lost sheep of the house of Jacob, Israel. Now, here is a portion of a tablet that was discovered from the great library of Assyria. It was fragmented or broken over the years. Mr. Smith, as well as other archaeologists, would go there and they would find fragments. Like they'd find this piece in the trench, and then they'd find this piece, and then they'd find this piece, and they'd cart all of this up and wrap it up, and they would box it up and ship it back to the British Museum of History. And then for 6 months after they returned, they went back very, very gently, and they would put these pieces and try and place them together, as was this tablet, paced together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces for this tablet to be read and the information on it. Next, please. And how was it written? Well, there was like a cylinder, all right? For example, this is a Sumerian cuneiform tablet listing herders and cows in the goddess Inaea's fields, 21st and 20th century BC replica, reproduction provided by the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. So this is a cylinder. And they take this round cylinder, and they take clay, and they would take the cylinder, and they would roll the cylinder over the clay, and from the cylinder, it would make indentations into the clay, and that's how they made their tablets that they would read. Later, we would do with ink on paper, with a press that would slam down, that had all the words and the text and everything made out. We did it on paper. They did it with clay and with round cylinders. All right, the cuneiform. Next, please. Here is another cuneiform little tablet. This is a finger, by the way, the end of a finger. You can see how small it is. Here's another finger, part of the hand here. Here's another cuneiform tablet. You see all the indentations and how it was cut. I mean, this was an art, a precision at the time of writing and communicating back and forth, like sending letters. They would send a tablet with a courier to someone, a cuneiform tablet with this, their language, with a little cylinder that was made and cut, and they would make the tablet, give it to the courier, and he'd take it over. Something later called like the Pony Express, delivering the mail. All right? Next, please. Now, here, for example, were pieces that were handmade, hand-cut, and they were delivered to England, but they were brought forth in hand by pen, and they were copied with the alphabet of the Assyrians and of the Babylonians, to show you again in more colorful text here, like the inscriptions that would be on the cuneiform tablets. Next, please. Now, I'd like to inject at this time that Babylon created an alphabet for the cuneiform. Assyria never had an alphabet. But Assyria later adopted. Yes, could I have a little air or something, please?
It's out in here.
What we had here is we had Babylon had the alphabet. This is very important. Assyria adopted the alphabet of Babylon. And eventually in time, Assyria had a greater library than the Babylonians did. See? So I'm just bringing this to your enlightenment. And of course, Assyria was the northern kingdom of what we call the land of Samaria, and Babylon was the southern. You would also know it today as Kuwait, Iraq, and where the Kurds are in northern Iraq today, if you were to look at a map. Okay?